Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name is Joe. I'm your host for this week, and as always, I'm joined by my college friend Mark. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. How you doing, Mark?
Pretty good. I took my dog for a walk this morning, and I was really enjoying the feeling of being outside without a mask on. So there's just this sort of window of opportunity to appreciate the absence of a mask before that starts to seem normal again. So it felt good.
Yes, and my own version of that is I went to Yankee Stadium for the first time last night since October of 2019. We're taping this in June of 2021, so it's been a long time.
Right.
And things felt pretty normal there. You know, we were in close quarters in our section, and nobody was masked, and everybody was fully vaccinated, and so it felt pretty normal.
Yeah, and normal feels good. Yeah, normal feels really good.
Yes, that's right. So, okay, well, let's move right on to this episode's topic. And I feel like I have to come clean about something. I was in a UFO club when I was in the 6th grade and the 7th grade. I admit it. It was in the mid-1970s, so a lot of strange things happened in the mid-1970s. I'm sure you would agree.
Yes.
One of my idols, in fact, was the UFO researcher Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was pretty famous in the 70s. My friends and I would meet after sundown and stare up into the sky and try to spot UFOs.
Did you see anything?
We saw airplanes that we wanted to identify as UFOs.
Yeah.
But other than that, sometimes you get the rare, you ever see like an airplane that's going directly away from you or toward you, so it kind of looks like it might be a UFO, and we had a couple of situations like that. So that's my long way of saying that the recent news headlines about UFOs kind of awakened that nerdy 12-year-old boy that still lives inside me. This is personal for me, Mark. So thus my question for you, which is, what's the most likely explanation for UFOs?
Okay. So UFOs, which are otherwise known as unidentified aerial phenomena, are UAPs, but I grew up in UFOs, so UFOs they shall be.
Me too.
They're back in the news right now because the Office of Naval Intelligence is set to release a report. And they're releasing this report because of a clause that Marco Rubio slipped into a stimulus and appropriations package that former President Trump signed back on December 27th.
Huh. So Rubio has done one good thing in his career, I guess.
So it would seem. The clause gave the Director of National Intelligence 180 days to work with the Secretary of Defense on a detailed analysis of unidentified aerial phenomena data and intelligence gathered by government or military bureaus. And that 180-day clock is set to run out on June 26th, which is a Saturday. So most people expect the report to drop on Friday the 25th. And depending on when you're listening to this, the report may already have been released. But we are recording this in advance, so we're in the dark.
A week in advance, to be precise.
Right.
So we're just on the cusp of receiving this report.
There are some UFO enthusiasts who are expecting the report to be a bombshell, partly because of 3 videos that have been in the news lately and which were the subject of a recent 60-minute segment. The videos date to 2004 and 2015 and show footage shot from the cockpit of Navy jets that scrambled to intercept the targets. The videos are all over YouTube if you want to look for yourself. These objects showed up on radar and were visually spotted by multiple jet pilots, and a number of people have backed the reports up since then. So if this is all a hoax, a lot of people are in on it. 2 of the videos show vague, blotchy shapes in the sky, one described as saucer-like, the other shaped like a tic-tac. On the recorded cockpit chatter, you can hear one pilot saying that there's an entire fleet of whatever it is that he was looking at.
Wow.
And there are eyewitness reports that one of the UFOs captured on video had been hovering above another object that was beneath the surface of the ocean water, and that was said to be much bigger than a submarine. There is, however, no video of this subject. That would, by the way, be a USO, an unidentified swimming object. which is a thing, but it is not often documented.
Okay.
The third video appears to show a metallic sphere moving swiftly over the surface of the ocean. Though from the zoom effect on the camera, it's hard to tell whether it's right above the waves or high up in the air. These military videos were classified but leaked by person or persons unknown. And one of the videos was initially uploaded to a server owned by a German company that produces video effects and movie special effects. So that's either an unfortunate coincidence or evidence that the whole thing is a hoax, depending on your point of view.
Can I jump in for a second and just ask, why would a video like this be classified in the first place?
Essentially because if the military is collecting evidence of, for instance, Soviet or Chinese drones that are vastly superior in capability to U.S. jets, and that they are unable to counter or identify the source of, that would be kind of embarrassing and possibly alarming, and they would not want people to know about it.
Right, because I remember even from my childhood that the government's unwillingness to tell the people what they know and what they don't know itself caused a lot of suspicions back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
So I wonder why it begs the question, why don't you just come clean and show us what you've got? But your explanation makes sense.
Yeah, and we will have a lot more to say about conspiracy theories and alleged cover-ups and what the government has and has not said. So stay tuned.
Okay.
So it is unambiguous. Everyone would agree that the videos are fuzzy and hard to make out. And there are conflicting eyewitness testimonies around the events. And this always seems to be the way of it. Reports of UFOs are universally accompanied by fuzzy video, blurry photographs, and or conflicting testimony. Some of the UFO photos are remarkably and almost hilariously bad. My favorite blurry image of an alleged UFO, which I came across in an article on the Popular Mechanics website, is almost certainly a photo of a pot lid that someone had thrown like a frisbee. Either that one was a hoax, and a pretty lazy one at that, I have to say, or aliens are for some reason putting black plastic handles on top of their spacecraft. So all of this, of course, is fertile soil for conspiracy theories. A 1997 Gallup poll indicated that 45% of Americans believed that aliens had visited our planet, but a much higher percentage, 80%, believed that the government has concealed what they know about UFOs. And it's probably not a coincidence that this poll was taken in the heyday of the X-Files, a popular TV series whose entire premise was that the government is covering up all sorts of paranormal phenomena, UFOs included. So I thought just for fun, we could start out with a game of UFO conspiracy theory bingo. I'm going to read you a list, and you tell me which ones you think are real-life conspiracy theories that I found online.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Number one. Classified documents reveal that in 1947, President Truman formed a secret group called Majestic 12 to study materials recovered from alien wreckage. Real theory or something that I made up?
You know what? I'm going to say that that's real because I think the UFO stuff intensified right after World War II, and that's when Truman would have been president. So I'll guess that's real.
You're correct. That is a real conspiracy theory. Okay, number two. In 1971, a UFO landed at an Air Force base in New Mexico, and the personnel there had a friendly conversation with the aliens. This close encounter of the third kind was caught on camera, but the footage has since gone missing. Real or made up?
That one is hard to believe, and I never heard of it, and I was really reading a lot about it at the time, so I'm going to guess that that's made up.
That is a real conspiracy theory.
Wow.
Number three. The Men in Black movies are based on a real thing. Mysterious men dressed in black suits who show up to harass and silence people who report UFOs.
Made up.
That's a real conspiracy theory.
Okay.
Number four. Aliens are secretly colonizing Earth. Our government knows about it, but some officials are collaborating with the aliens, and they are able to control other human beings using electromagnetic waves.
Well, I'm tempted to say that that's a real conspiracy theory because it sounds pretty three-dimensional to me, so I'm going to say real.
You are correct. It was also a plot line in the X-Files, I recall, but it's also a real conspiracy theory. Okay, next one. Crashed UFOs are stored in Area 51, an Air Force base near Las Vegas, where scientists work on reverse engineering alien technology and exploring such things as time travel. Real or made up?
That is unquestionably real.
Yes, you are right. That is 100% real. Next one. Aliens have constructed a base on the dark side of the moon, and some of the moon's craters were actually left by bombs dropped by the Apollo spacecraft in the course of a secret galactic war. Is that real, or did I make it up?
I think you must have made that one up.
That one is real.
Well, so far everything is real, Mark. I think you're making a point here.
Okay, next one. Shape-shifting aliens have been impersonating human beings and infiltrating the government with the goal of taking over the planet. Is that one real, or did I make it up?
I'm going to say everything you say from this point on is real.
You're correct. That one is real. And finally, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, recorded a radar signal from space that communicated the technology to open a wormhole to a destination hundreds of light years away. Real or made up?
That's so fanciful, I think it has to be out of human imagination other than yours. So I'll say real.
It's made up. That one's actually the plot of the movie Contact, starring Jodie Foster.
Oh, okay. Which I saw, so I should have known that.
So, stepping back from the conspiracy theories, what's a reasonable conclusion about UFOs? And first off, we can say that UFOs are not one thing, they are many things. There have been several thousand sightings, and they don't all have the same explanation. So, a quick history lesson. The term flying saucer was coined in 1947. Civilian pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying his plane over the state of Washington when, near Mount Rainier, he reportedly saw 9 disc or crescent-shaped objects glowing bluish-white and flying in a V formation. Arnold figured that he was witnessing some sort of military exercise, but he estimated that the craft were flying around 1,200 miles per hour, which is about twice the speed of a commercial jet today, and faster than any military jet at the time was able to fly. He compared the motion of the objects to, quote, a saucer if you skipped it across the water. The press picked up on this phrase, and the, quote, flying saucer, unquote, was born. So a little bit of UFO trivia is the fact that flying saucer was actually a misquote. He did not report seeing flying saucers.
But boy, did that influence the creation of science fiction films in the 1950s, because they're all Forbidden Planet, all of them look like flying saucers.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And his report became a new sensation, and it kicked off thousands and thousands of sightings and reports in the years since. One of the better known was the so-called Roswell incident of 1947. Just about 1 month after Arnold's story hit the headlines, and everyone was excited about these flying saucers. A ranch foreman noticed debris on a ranch 30 miles outside of Roswell, New Mexico. He called the sheriff, who brought in the Air Force, who collected the debris and transported it back to Roswell. The initial report out of the Air Force was that they had recovered pieces of, quote, a flying disc, unquote. Later, the Air Force would say they'd recovered pieces of a weather balloon, but the story of the flying disc was already out there, and it took on its own momentum. When the military tried to walk the flying disc story back, it just looked like a cover-up. And there may, in fact, have been a cover-up, but not of UFOs. The modern consensus is that it was, in fact, a balloon that crashed in Roswell, which was carrying classified instruments to monitor Soviet nuclear tests. The military didn't want to admit the balloon's actual purpose, so they lied about it being a weather balloon. But to this day, people will cite Roswell as an example of an alien encounter. In 1980, a book called The Roswell Incident was the first to claim that the crashed ship contained the bodies of alien astronauts, and the story spun up from there. Eventually, people started claiming that there were 2 ships that crashed, not one, and that 8 alien astronauts had been recovered, 6 dead, 2 surviving, and there was a secret alien autopsy, and so on and so on, the story getting bigger and more sensational with every telling.
Yes.
There are many conspiracy theories and outright hoaxes that are based on the Roswell incident, far too many to mention here. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I suggest you start with the very detailed Wikipedia article on the topic, which I'll link to in the show notes on our Facebook page.
And I think, isn't this where all the Area 51 stuff comes from, too? Because Area 51, my understanding, is a real place.
Yeah.
And it's near Roswell, New Mexico.
Yes.
So I think they're connected, right?
Area 51 is outside of Las Vegas, so it's not too far from Roswell. And it is repeatedly cited within UFO communities as a place where crashed alien craft have been taken or alien autopsies were conducted. There have been reports that people see weird shapes flying above Area 51 as if either aliens are still there or the Air Force is testing out alien technology. So yes, there's a direct line of connection between Area 51 and Roswell.
Yeah, and there could be a crumb of truth in that information, too, because Area 51 may well be the place where the crashed weather balloon was taken for identification and post-mortem autopsy type thing.
Yeah, entirely possible. So there have been at least 4 American military and or government projects to investigate, classify, and report on UFOs. I should mention that this should not be construed as proof in itself that the government is acting on the belief that extraterrestrials are visiting our planet. If the military has reason to believe that foreign spy planes may be violating U.S. airspace or surveillance drones might be scoping out our military bases, that would be an obvious national security issue worth looking into. Anyway, Project Sign, which was kicked off in 1948 by the Air Force, came first and was succeeded by Project Grudge in 1949 and then Project Blue Book, which operated from 1952 until 1969. These military programs were to one extent or another hampered by pretty aggressive skepticism. Project Grudge in particular appears to have functioned for the sole purpose of debunking reports of UFOs and shutting down the investigations. And this was backed up by a scientific community that for the most part regarded reports of UFOs as inherently ridiculous. Project Blue Book did attempt to be more even-handed than Project Grudge had been, and ultimately documented 12,618 sightings of UFOs. When the project was shut down, a statistical analysis of its reports indicated that about 9% of the reports were discarded because they contained insufficient information to reach a subject. 69% of UFO sightings were judged to have known causes, and within this category of known causes, about 9/10 were misidentified aircraft, weather balloons, astronomical features like stars or meteors, and so on. 8% of the cases involved possible hoaxes or publicity seekers, and 1.5% involved crackpots and crazy people. After the known causes and the insufficient information cases, the remaining 22% of UFO reports were marked as unidentified. So the investigators did believe that in these cases there was sufficient evidence that something real had been witnessed, but they were unable to identify what it was. So if you're looking for extraterrestrials, your best hope is in this unidentified 22%.
And to your point about aggressive skepticism, in prepping for this episode, I did read a couple of press articles about, what is all the fuss about UFOs right now in 2021. And I read something interesting that I didn't know, which is that there apparently was a great stigma on the Air Force and Navy pilots for even reporting UFO sightings.
Yeah.
Probably stemming from that era you just discussed, when government was trying to tamp down all the furor and maybe heaping ridicule on its own people for even reporting this stuff. I didn't know there was a stigma associated with reporting UFOs, but perhaps it was seen as silly, frivolous, like reporting Bigfoot.
Essentially, yeah, I would say in the same category as saying that you sighted Bigfoot from your jet cockpit. And I would also say that that remains the case today within the scientific community. Any scientist who goes on record saying that some phenomena could be alien spacecraft is immediately shouted down. So there's a very broad consensus that does not think it's worthwhile to be talking about these things, which is unfortunate in that it shuts down inquiry. So after Project Blue Book shut down, there was a gap of nearly 40 years until the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program came around, and it operated in secret as part of the Pentagon from 2007 to 2012. This was a pet project of former Senator Harry Reid, who was influenced by a close friend who strongly believed that we are being visited by alien civilizations. It could be that the forthcoming report will include details of what this more recent program documented. I'm sure that right now some people are on Reddit forums making excited predictions about the report revealing alien spacecraft stored in Area 51,
Right.
or the secret treaty that President Eisenhower is supposed to have signed with aliens, or how Velcro was originally alien technology. My guess, however, is that it's going to be more of the same. Given the history of these sorts of reports, my bet is that the new one will follow a similar script. Thousands of sightings documented, probably about 3/4 of them debunked, another 10% or so discarded because the reports were too vague to draw a judgment, and whatever is left over lacking a clear explanation. So to answer your question at the top of the episode, the most likely explanation for UFOs is the same as it's been since the 1940s. People see something like an airplane or an unmanned drone or a flock of geese or a meteor, and because of a trick of the light or because, like you and I when we were kids and we really wanted to believe, they misconstrue what they're looking at. Now, that's the safe bet, but I think we can agree that it's not very interesting.
Yes, we can agree.
I grew up reading science fiction and dreaming about interstellar travel, and there's a part of me that really wants UFOs to be real. A universe in which intelligent life forms from another part of the galaxy are visiting our solar system is simply a lot more fun and engaging than a universe in which there's nothing around us but the cold emptiness of space. So instead of ending on that uninspiring note, let's take a closer look at the other side of the equation. How likely is it that UFOs are extraterrestrial in nature? So the aliens would have to be coming from somewhere, and the nearest planets outside our solar system are between 4 and 5 light years away. That's approximately 25 trillion miles. At top speed, the rocket that propelled the Apollo spacecraft to the moon traveled at a rate of 25,000 miles an hour. So if the astronauts had skipped the moon and just kept going at a constant rate of speed to the nearest star, it would have taken them over 100,000 years to get there. Wikipedia tells me that the fastest outward-bound spacecraft, Voyager 1, is currently traveling at a rate of 1/18,000th of the speed of light. This is a lot faster than the Apollo rocket, but it would still take 80,000 years to reach the nearest planet, and that's assuming that our alien visitors have not come from a system that's much farther away.
Right.
So if aliens are visiting our planet, we'd have to assume at least one of the following is true. Either they took a very long time getting here, or the aliens have the ability to cover distances much faster than we can. And this in turn means either that they travel at much higher speeds than our science has yet managed, and they developed the technology to produce the vast amounts of energy needed to accelerate to those speeds, and also to keep interstellar dust, gas, and the occasional asteroid from shredding their spacecraft when it's at top speed, or they can expend vast energies to produce artificial wormholes or warp the fabric of space to take a shortcut from here to there.
Right. I agree with everything you just said, but I still don't think it's implausible that that could happen, and here's why. The universe has been around for about 10 billion years, so life forms have had, the oldest possible life forms have had 10 billion years to figure out how to travel at the speed of light, at or near the speed of light. So I think it is possible that over the course of the entire life of the universe, that some life form could have developed this kind of technology. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all.
Oh, I agree that it's possible.
Right.
At this point, we're just looking at probability.
Finding us is the proverbial needle in the haystack. That's the part that's harder to wrap my brain around. But having the technology to travel fast enough to find us, I think, is entirely plausible.
So in any of these scenarios, visiting another planet is not a trivial undertaking. You're spending lots of time and an unimaginable amount of energy, or both, accomplishing it. So we can presume that no aliens are dropping by for the hell of it. If they're here, it's for a very good reason. And so the question is why? Earth doesn't seem to be all that special. There are hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy and probably billions of habitable planets. So nothing about Earth is likely to be all that unique or special. We don't represent a threat to any spacefaring civilization. Their technology would crush us like a bug, and it hardly seems worth the trouble to travel all this way to conquer or exterminate us. Maybe we could say that they're just curious, very, very curious, given the sheer number of sightings so far, since you'd have to assume that for every UFO sighting there are hundreds or thousands of visits that no one noticed. Otherwise, it's an open question why the aliens would be here in the first place. And there are other perplexing questions to answer. For instance, UFOs are spotted in our atmosphere, but they've never been seen approaching or leaving the planet. They appear out of nowhere and then completely disappear, leaving no trace behind, aside from crop circles, of course, but those were almost certainly a hoax. And the maneuvers that UFOs are reported to make do not appear to follow the laws of physics or aerodynamics. So either their science is so advanced that they're not subject to those laws, or, and this does seem like the simpler explanation, it's all a bunch of hooey. As much as I want UFOs to be real, in the end, I regretfully suspect that they are not, and ultimately the argument I find most compelling is based on something I carry around inside my pocket. For decades, people have been reporting UFOs, sometimes saying that the aliens got out of their spaceships and talked with them, inserted probes into them, or on a couple occasions even had sex with them. There was, however, always a notable lack of evidence for these claims. Today, though, nearly every person on the planet owns a camera phone and carries it around with them constantly. So surely if aliens were flying through the sky and occasionally landing in our backyards, we'd be seeing an explosion of photos and video of those interactions at significantly higher quality than the grainy UFO footage of yesteryear. Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube should be full of that sort of thing. It hasn't happened. The video evidence from recent encounters is just as grainy, blurry, and hard to interpret as it was decades ago. So as is the case with ghosts, Sasquatch, and the Loch Ness Monster, alien visitors have proven remarkably resourceful in evading our iPhones. I have to believe that if UFOs were real, we'd have much better evidence by now. In a 1969 speech, the famous astronomer Carl Sagan argued for a sort of open-minded skepticism when it comes to reports of UFOs. He said, and I quote, "The idea of benign or hostile space aliens from other planets visiting the Earth is clearly an emotional idea. There are two sorts of self-deception here. Either accepting the idea of extraterrestrial visitation by space aliens in the face of very meager evidence because we want it to be true, or rejecting such an idea out of hand in the absence of sufficient evidence because we don't want it to be true. Each of these extremes is a serious impediment to the study of UFOs." That seems like sound advice. I think it's fair to say that, in Carl Sagan's terms, there is insufficient evidence for extraterrestrial visitation, and we also don't have sufficient evidence to debunk every report of UFOs. In the end, we're left with a unsatisfying non-conclusion and waiting, possibly forever, for final definitive proof.
Yeah, that is truly the most likely scenario. I agree. But I have so many thoughts about what you just said. So let me try to run through some of this stuff.
Okay.
First, on the conspiracy theories. I mean, this is a theme that we've touched on in mansplaining before, the whole phenomenon of confirmation bias and the rigged election and QAnon, and also you don't have to sell me on the fact that humans want to believe this stuff and their imaginations take them where it takes them. But I just want to beg to differ on one thing you said about UFOs not being real. And maybe perhaps this is semantic, Mark, but I think that UFOs are literally real, but they're not necessarily extraterrestrial phenomena. You know, that thing that those pilots are seeing is quite possibly real and not just some stray reflection or flock of geese or Venus in the sky at a weird hour or something like all the, I do think that of the thousands of reports of UFOs, 95% of them can be debunked by the most obvious stuff like birds and planets and weather balloons and drones, right? But there is that unexplainable chunk, I think you mentioned the 22% or whatever it is. I would argue that that stuff is literally real, but that doesn't mean it's extraterrestrial in origin. I mean, what do you think of that idea?
Yeah, totally correct. And you caught me in imprecise terminology, so thank you for pointing it out in case some of our listeners were confused by that. When I say UFOs are real, I was thinking space aliens.
Yeah.
So I was being sloppy with that. I totally believe that some UFOs are actual things in the air that people are seeing flying, and they are unidentified, and so that makes them real, live UFOs.
Right.
It doesn't make them space aliens. They could be drones. Like very significant chance, I think, these days that UFOs are drones because, of course, drone technology has exploded over the last few years.
Right. And to that point, that's the next thing I wanted to mention, which is my strong suspicion of the reason why the U.S. military, the defense establishment, will put this back on the front burner, so to speak, right now, is because they're trying to figure out whether there's some hypersonic technology that's being employed by Russia or China that could possibly explain these darting images that the pilots are seeing and reporting that they're even faster than the F-18s that they themselves are flying, you know? So I think there's likely a concern on the part of the U.S. government that Russia and China or some other country are out in front of us in terms of hypersonic flight, and this report may shed some light on where the government stands in that investigation, which also is a fascinating thing to contemplate.
Yeah, it's the military's worst nightmare, that something that we've gotten very used to over the last 50 years, which is that the U.S. military technology is superior to the technology out of other countries. Their worst nightmare is the prospect that some country has just made this dramatic leap, a breakthrough in aeronautic technology, and they are producing craft that is vastly more capable, suddenly vastly more capable than what the U.S. can produce. And so I think they're very much hoping that that's not the case, but in good faith, most likely they are investigating the possibility.
Right. And then there's one other thing I want to mention, and this is kind of the airy-fairiest of all the ideas I have about this, but I want to run this by you. I do think, and I think you would agree with me, it's highly likely that life exists outside of the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. Given the recent research into the number of potentially habitable planets that are just about the right distance away from just about the right size of star to form organic compounds and life as we understand it, it's hard to believe that it wouldn't have happened somewhere else, given the trillions and trillions of possibilities outside of our own solar system for that kind of life to develop.
Right.
Having said that, though, I'm just not sure we're ever going to be able to have contact with those other forms of life, even if they are able to master the flight speeds at or near the speed of light and actually make it from their galaxy to ours.
Right.
I think if extraterrestrials are visiting us, chances are that their technology is so advanced that we probably wouldn't even be aware of their existence, you know? Just to cover the vast distance between their world and ours would require traveling at the speed of light. So how would we even see them or comprehend their presence, you know? How would we even know that our senses are the senses we know, sight, smell, touch?
Sure.
Could we even perceive them using those senses, you know? That's the bigger reason for my skepticism about why we're not going to encounter alien life anytime soon and perhaps never. So I basically agree with you, but I wanted to put that reason on the table as what I'm hanging my hat on.
Right. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first is that, yes, there are hundreds of billions of stars just in the Milky Way galaxy, I believe. 100 to 400 billion, I think is the figure I found. And so you can presume that there are at least 1 billion planets where life is possible. But you also, there is a little bit of an asterisk to apply to that, which is that the universe is so old that it's entirely possible that life sprung up on every one of those planets and then eventually went extinct long before human life evolved.
Sure.
It could be that just the span of existence within the galaxy is so vast that you can have entire civilizations rise and fall and crumble into dust before any other civilization comes along to notice that they were there. Mm-hmm. So there is the time scale to consider. The other thing, which I have always thought is a little bit of wishful thinking on the part of science fiction enthusiasts like myself, is the prospect that we would be able to communicate with aliens once we came across them.
Yes.
Because, consider the dolphin. We are much more closely related to the dolphin than we would be to any alien species. We evolved on the same planet. We have lived within the same space for hundreds of thousands of years. We have generations of scientists who have been able to work right up next to dolphins, examining everything about them.
Yes.
We are not able to communicate with dolphins.
And they have huge brains like us, too. And yet we still can't communicate with them.
Yeah, we're almost certain that they have language. In fact, I read something a couple years ago that suggested that dolphins have names and they call each other by name. But in terms of just basic sentence structure to communicate an idea, we have not managed to reach that point with the dolphins. So imagine a alien who evolved in a vastly different ecosystem Why would we be able to communicate with them? Why would we imagine a scenario like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where a keyboard player just starts playing tones to a spaceship, and in the space of 30 seconds, we're having detailed conversations? It seems implausible to me.
Right.
And I've always had this suspicion that when we do finally encounter extraterrestrial life at some point in the evolution of the human species, my guess is that it's going to be 20, 30, 40 years before we recognize it as life. That there's going to be an argument within the scientific community about whether or not that's a life form.
Yeah.
And that there'll be pitched battles, and that eventually the consensus will swing around to, yes, this is life, because it will be so alien that when we first look at it, we will not even recognize it as a life form.
Right. That reminds me of the Star Trek episode with the silicon-based life form that they thought was a bunch of rock, until it started killing some of the miners on the planet.
And thank God Spock was there with the Vulcan mind meld to break through that whole thing.
Yes. And full disclosure, Mark and I watched that episode about 100 times when we were in college together on Saturday afternoon. But to your example about the dolphin, interesting you pick the dolphin, right? Because I think of the dolphin as a large-brained sentient creature, probably as similar to us as almost any other life form on this planet except for the primates,
Mm-hmm.
But the example I would have given is the ant. Remember our drone podcast where I was talking about the powerful AI treating us the way we treat ants, so superior to us that we're just like ants that can be stepped on, And I kind of think that in agreeing with your concept that the life form would be so different from us, it would probably also be so advanced from us in order to get here that we would be to it as the ant is to a human being.
Right. Yeah. That reminds me of a science fiction novel I read back in the day, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, where the premise is that there's this intergalactic war between human beings and kind of insect-like creatures. The war started when these aliens just showed up and started massacring human beings, and we fought back. And the reveal at the end is that the aliens were deeply remorseful because when they arrived, they did not recognize human beings as a life form.
Wow.
So kind of that idea of, yes, if a super advanced species shows up and does not recognize it as a life form, that would be a very bad day for humanity.
Yes. Boy, that's very poignant. And that reminds me of something else I read somewhere that I think is apropos to this discussion. Have you heard about the zoo hypothesis? A lot of thinkers have speculated that an advanced life form that was capable of visiting us here would also be morally and ethically so advanced that it would know not to interfere with us the way that we interfere with zoo animals, And so it would kind of wall off the earth as this zoo where these life forms, primitive life forms live, and let's not disturb their civilization, So in other words, they know we're here, but they're not contacting us precisely so as to not pollute us or destroy us in any way, the way we do with zoo animals. I thought that was a fascinating idea.
Yeah, I'm getting some very strong Star Trek Prime Directive vibes here.
Yes.
Is that not exactly the Star Trek Prime Directive?
Yeah, I think it is. And, there's a reason why Star Trek captured the imagination of so many people, because it was primarily an empathetic and very pro-humanity, optimistic meditation on what the future could hold. So, yeah.
Unfortunately, it was also very pro-miniskirts for all the women on staff.
Yes.
So they had events equally far along every axis.
Yes, right. So that was really interesting, Mark.
And I answered your questions?
I think you did, yeah. And I suspected the conversation would get really interesting as it did at the end there. So I'm glad I asked that question.
You ready for the question?
Yeah. Do you have one for me?
I do. I'm hoping we can talk about workplace automation. We touched on artificial intelligence in a recent episode, and one of the consequences of AI is the prospect that more and more jobs will be automated. For example, as soon as self-driving cars become safe and reliable, a lot of taxi drivers, truck drivers, and delivery drivers will be looking for work. So my question is two parts. First, what's the timetable we're looking at for major job loss in this country? Not just manual labor, but also creative and knowledge-based work. And second, what needs to happen between now and then to keep broad sectors of our society from slipping below the poverty line?
Wow, that's a very meaty question. Raises a lot of important issues.
I look forward to going through them.
Yeah, I will. I'll get on it, and we'll talk about it in a few weeks. Okay, folks. Well, we know you like this episode of Mansplaining. That's why you're listening.
That's why you're still here.
Why you're still here, yeah. And if you want to leave a comment about this episode or any other episode in the Mansplaining podcast, please go to our Facebook page, Mansplaining the Podcast. You can like us there or give us any kind of feedback, positive or negative. We read all of it. And we also welcome your ideas for topics for future episodes. So please go to our Facebook page. It's really the only way we know that there are people out there supporting us and listening. So please do that if you're so inclined. And with that said, that's all for this edition of Mansplaining. That was Mark. I'm Joe, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you next time. That's it for this edition of Mansplaining. Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Thank you for hanging out with us for a little bit, and we'll see you next time.